We are streaming. Welcome, everyone. Happy Sunday. It is about 11 a.m. here in Florida. It is May 11, 2025. We are starting our next part of this series called The Greatest Holy Leaf. Welcome. A quick introduction for Violetta. Violetta is a researcher and a writer in Baha'i history, and she has published 5 chronologies on the lives of Baha'u'lláh, the Bab, Abdu'l-Bahá, Shoghi Effendi, and the Greatest Holy Leaf. The chronologies, all of these, are indexed in several places and they're easy to find. We welcome you, please, to look at all the playlists here on the Clearwater Baha'is channel on YouTube. And also, we are streaming on the Facebook page, Baha'i Center of Clearwater. You're welcome to check them out. If you're just joining now, you're welcome to please sit with us and learn from this place in the life of the Greatest Holy Leaf. But we also please recommend that you go and look at the playlist because it's really amazing. So with that being said, Violetta, thank you for being here again. And we are off. We got a lot to cover today, I understand, on part 5.
Yes, we do. This is the most amazing, exciting, exhilarating part of Bahíyyih Khánum's life. And it takes place during the 8 months of absence of the Guardian in 1922. But before I begin, I absolutely have to give credit to Dr. Janet Khan's extraordinary 2005 biography, Prophet's Daughter, The Life and Legacy of Bahíyyih Khánum, Outstanding Heroine of the Faith. 20 years ago, when Dr. Janet Khan published her book, very little other than what Shoghi Effendi had shared about the Greatest Holy Leaf services was known to the general public. Dr. Janet Khan lifted the veil on this part of Bahíyyih Khánum's life in her extraordinary book, and buy it if you don't own it. It is life-changing. My work for this part relied very heavily on her research, and I am forever grateful to her for her precious contribution to Baha'i history. Most importantly, several parts of her analyses of the importance of Bahíyyih Khánum's role during this period and letters that are published in her book that cannot be found anywhere else. So with that being said, I want to start with part 1, the guardianship. Shoghi Effendi arrives in Haifa with his sister Ruhangis, who was studying in Scotland, and Lady Blumfield on the 16th of December, 1921, by train from Egypt, where he had sailed from England. He arrives in Haifa at 5:20 p.m. on the 29th of December, 1921, exactly 1 month after the funeral of Abdu'l-Bahá, and he was welcomed at the train station by many Baha'i friends. The agony of bereavement had already taken its toll on Shoghi Effendi. He was broken by grief. He was so frail that he had to be helped up the stairs of the master's house when he arrived. And he was so devastated by Abdu'l-Bahá's absence from the house that he was confined to bed for several days. Once he had arrived in Haifa, Shoghi Effendi first stayed in his old room in the master's house, right next to Abdu'l-Bahá's, which was now empty. But soon the guardian, Shoghi Effendi, was moved to a room in the house of his aunt Ruha Khanum, while the Greatest Holy Leaf had 2 houses built on the roof of the master's home for Shoghi Effendi. So for the first 3 days of his arrival, the 29th, the 30th, and the 31st of December, the Greatest Holy Leaf did not show Shoghi Effendi the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá. But after those 3 days, she could wait no longer. Shoghi Effendi had to know the faith needed its guardian. The will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá. This is the original will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá in its own handwriting, published on Baha'i World News Service. On the morning of January 3rd, 1922, at the house of the master, Abdu'l-Bahā's will and testament was read aloud to 9 men, most of whom were members of the family of Abdu'l-Bahá. These men witnessed Abdu'l-Bahā's own handwriting, his seals and his signatures throughout the 3 documents that composed his will and testament. At Shoghi Effendi's request, a true copy of Abdu'l-Bahā's will and testament was made by one of the men present, a Persian Baha'i. The will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá was read a second time publicly on the 6th of January, 1922, after the speeches and tributes in honor of Abdu'l-Bahá at the 40th day memorial feast. And it was read a third time on January 7th in the master's house to an audience composed entirely of Baha'is. The intended recipients of the weighty injunctions and provisions contained in this epoch-making document. The assembled Baha'is hailed from Persia, India, Egypt, England, Italy, Germany, America, and Japan. Shoghi Effendi was not present during this reading, as was his habit, but everyone in the audience rose every time his name was mentioned in the will and testament as a sign of respect. To those who were assembled, it was clear that the responsibility of leading the faith and its affairs had now fallen on the shoulders of Shoghi Effendi, now and forevermore guardian of the Baha'i faith. It fell to Bahíyyih Khánum, and not to Shoghi Effendi, to share the provisions of Abdu'l-Bahā's will and testament with the Baha'i world. The Greatest Holy Leaf sent 2 cables to Persia first on January 7th, 1922. The first one read, "Memorial meetings all over the world have been held. The Lord of all the worlds in his will and testament has revealed his instructions. Copy will be sent. Inform believers." The second cable that Bahíyyih Khánum sent to Persia read, "Will and testament forwarded. Shoghi Effendi Center Cause." 9 days after sending the first 2 cables to the Persian Baha'is, on 16th of January 1922, the Greatest Holy Leaf sent the following cable to the United States. In will, Shoghi Effendi appointed guardian cause and head of House of Justice. Inform American friends. It was from the pen of the Greatest Holy Leaf, the daughter of Baha'u'lláh and the sister of Abdu'l-Bahá, that every single Baha'i in the world learned about the new guardian. But of course, crisis follows victory. 2 weeks after the Baha'i world was informed of Shoghi Effendi's station as guardian, the major crisis of Shoghi Effendi's ministry occurred suddenly and without warning. This is the crisis of the keys to the shrine of Baha'u'lláh. Mirza Muhammad Ali, Abdu'l-Bahā's unfaithful half-brother, began actively plotting against the guardian, and he petitioned the civil authorities of British Mandate Palestine to turn over custodianship of the shrine of Baha'u'lláh, stating that, falsely, that he was Abdu'l-Bahā's lawful successor because he was his half-brother. Then, on Tuesday, the 30th of January, 1922, the covenant breakers stole the keys of the shrine of Baha'u'lláh. No one could enter the shrine. They could only stand outside of it. This crisis would last for a full year, from 1922 to 1923, and it would require both Shoghi Effendi and Bahíyyih Khánum to make appeals to the government of British Mandate Palestine for the rightful restitution of the keys to the Baha'is. I want to take a moment to exalt the relationship between the guardian and the Greatest Holy Leaf. In The Priceless Pearl, Ruhiyyih Khánum described the strength of the bond between the Greatest Holy Leaf and the guardian. She said, "This love the guardian had for the Greatest Holy Leaf, who had watched over him for 35 years as far more than a mother, continued to be demonstrated for the remainder of his life. This is, of course, at the end of the life of the greatest holy leaf, because the guardian was 35. But notice that Bahíyyih Khánum says continued to be demonstrated for the remainder of his life. Until the end of Shoghi Effendi's life, he would never stop extolling the virtues and the station of his saintly great aunt and continue over and over to praise her priceless contributions and service to the faith. In the early weeks, months, years, and even days of his guardianship, Shoghi Effendi depended on the greatest holy leaf's encouragement and strength, as she had been right next to the center of the covenant, Abdu'l-Bahá. She had been right next to Baha'u'lláh during his entire ministry. And Shoghi Effendi said, after the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá to the realm of the All-Glorious, that light of the concourse on high enfolded me, speaking about Bahíyyih Khánum, helpless as I was in the embrace of her love, and with incomparable pity and tenderness, persuaded, guided, and urged me on to the requirements of servitude. The very elements of this frail being, meaning himself, were leavened with her love, refreshed by her companionship, sustained by her eternal spirit. The greatest holy leaf saw in Shoghi Effendi the fulfillment of Abdu'l-Bahā's highest aspirations and hopes, and the complete assurance that the faith of Baha'u'lláh was in the most capable hands. The greatest holy leaf knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that as guardian, Shoghi Effendi would move the faith of Baha'u'lláh towards its destiny by developing its administrative order. Bahíyyih Khánum from this moment on would throw all the weight of her station as the daughter of Baha'u'lláh behind the guardian and would devote the last 11 years of her life to support and serve Shoghi Effendi, and she would be his sole support and refuge. I want to tell you a little story about one of the first photographs of the guardian. This photograph, which I'm sure you've all seen before, is one of the earliest photographs of Shoghi Effendi as guardian of the faith. And what is not very well known is that it captures a moment of intention, a moment of tenderness between Shoghi Effendi and Bahíyyih Khánum. So this photograph was taken one day early in 1922 after Shoghi Effendi had walked back to the house of the master from a visit to the shrine of the Bab, and he had been followed by some of the Baha'is. In his hands, Shoghi Effendi was holding a handkerchief that was filled with violets that he had picked at the shrine of the Bab and that he was bringing back for the greatest holy leaf. When he arrived at the house of the master, Shoghi Effendi invited a young pilgrim, Boyce Norse, who was on pilgrimage with his family, to walk through the garden with him. Boyce Norse asked Shoghi Effendi if he could take his photograph, and surprisingly, Shoghi Effendi agreed. And so this is how the first photograph, or one of the first photographs of Shoghi Effendi as guardian that we have is actually a picture of him holding a sweet-scented gift for his beloved great aunt. At the Headship of the Faith, Part 2. By early April 1922, Shoghi Effendi, 5 months after his arrival in the Holy Land, was utterly crushed under the weight of his sorrows. And he found himself with no option other than to leave the Holy Land physically to regain the strength he needed to fulfill the heavy duties of his guardianship. Shoghi Effendi wrote a letter to the Baha'is about his forced leave of absence, where he appointed the greatest holy leaf to the headship of the faith. And I'm going to cover this in detail in the next section. So while Shoghi Effendi was away, he also he left a mandate for the greatest holy leaf that was very all-encompassing. She was in charge of the internal operations of the faith and the affairs of the faith in the Holy Land and around the world. And Shoghi Effendi made it clear that the greatest holy leaf held the primary position within the Holy Family. But Shoghi Effendi's mandate also extended to Bahíyyih Khánum's dealing with authorities, something he made explicit in a letter to this man, Colonel George Symes, the representative of the British government in Palestine and the governor of Phoenicia. He referred to Bahíyyih Khánum as his representative, a word he had used, as we saw last week, to describe Bahíyyih Khánum's role during Abdu'l-Bahá's absences and his journeys to the West. The letter to Colonel George Symes was intended to clarify her authority beyond reproach to the authorities of British Mandate Palestine. In it, Shoghi Effendi says, "As I am compelled to leave Haifa for reasons of health, I have named as my representative during my absence the sister of Abdu'l-Bahá, Bahíyyih Khánum." Then Shoghi Effendi appointed a body of 9 Baha'is to act tentatively as an assembly in the Holy Land. And he informed the Colonel Symes of this as well. And then on the 5th of April, 1922, Shoghi Effendi left Haifa. So I told you I was going to explain in detail the provisions that Shoghi Effendi had made in his absence. Immediately after Shoghi Effendi's departure, the Greatest Holy Leaf convened the committee that the Guardian had appointed. And she shared with the Baha'i world the provisions of the Guardian for the administration of the cause during his absence. Now, these provisions were published in Star of the West, volume 13, number 4, dated 17th of May, 1922, under the heading, Important Letters from Shoghi Effendi and Bahíyyih Khánum, the Greatest Holy Leaf. The first letter is, of course, this letter that I told you about that Shoghi Effendi wrote to the Baha'is. And it includes the Persian original. And it reads, "He is God. This servant, after that grievous event and great calamity, the ascension of His Holiness Abdu'l-Bahá to the Abha kingdom, has been so stricken with grief and pain, and so entangled in the troubles created by the enemies of the cause, that I consider my presence here at such a time and in such an atmosphere is not in accordance with the fulfillment of my important and sacred duties. For this reason, unable to do otherwise, I have left for a time the affairs of the cause both at home and abroad under the supervision of the Holy Family and the headship of the Greatest Holy Leaf. May my soul be a sacrifice to her, until by the grace of God, having gained health, strength, self-confidence, and spiritual energy, and having taken into my hands, in accordance with my aim and desire, entirely and regularly the work of service, I shall attain to my utmost spiritual hope and aspiration, the servant of his threshold, Shoghi." On the following page, the Greatest Holy Leaf writes a letter to the Baha'is. And although it is similar in content to the letter of the Guardian, you are going to see the amazing perspective that her letter brings to her period of headship of the faith, and her gentleness and her concern for Shoghi Effendi and her characteristic humility. Listen carefully to how she calls herself a prisoner. "He is God. To the servants of the Blessed Beauty and the dear friends of His Holiness Abdu'l-Bahá, although the hearts of the people of Baha are intensely burning on account of the great calamity of the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá, and the sobbing and sighing of the friends have reached the ears of the Supreme Concourse and the hosts of holiness in the Abha paradise, yet, because this day is the day of service, and this hour is the hour of diffusing the fragrances, the friends of God must, like a bright flame, arise in service to the cause of God and surpass one another in service." They should be like penetrating meteors, expelling every disloyal covenant breaker, in order that the preserved tablet of God, they may be recorded with the group who has fulfilled the covenant and testament of God. His Holiness, the guardian of the cause of God, the primal branch, the joy of the people of Baha, Shoghi Effendi, because of this great calamity, most painful event, infinite sorrow, and the severity of the effect upon himself, has desired to travel for a short period, that he may regain his health and have rest. Then he will return to the holy threshold, arise in service to the cause of God, and perform his duties. According to a letter written by his own hand, which is the one we have just read, which is enclosed, he has appointed this prisoner to supervise and manage the affairs of the cause, through consultation with the Holy Family during his absence. Therefore, this perishable one temporarily has organized an assembly to act according to the advice of the souls who were appointed and nominated by him, His Holiness Shoghi Effendi. I am hopeful that during the period of his absence, the friends of God and the maidservants of the Merciful may show forth great efforts in the progress of the cause of God, and the cause of God may spread rapidly. Verily, he is the compassionate and merciful to his servants. Signed and sealed, Bahíyyih, month of Shaban, 1340, April 1922, translated by Dr. Zia M. Baghdadi, Chicago, May 1922. There was a question last week about how the letters were translated, and this is one way, is that it was sent in Persian to Chicago, and Dr. Zia Baghdadi translated it there, and then it was published in English with the Persian original. This is one of the few examples of Bahíyyih Khánum's own handwriting that we have. And it's interesting because both the Persian of Shoghi Effendi and the Persian of the Greatest Holy Leaf was included in this reproduction in Star of the West. Now, sorry, hold on. After these two letters by Shoghi Effendi and the Greatest Holy Leaf, Star of the West published a 5-page letter from The Guardian between pages 83 and 88 of Star of the West, volume 13, number 4, which we're not going to read today because that is not the subject of today's talk, but I encourage you to find it and read it. 8 years. All told, the Greatest Holy Leaf single-handedly held the center of the faith, protected the cause from covenant breakers, managed the affairs of the local Baha'is, defended the Baha'is persecuted in Persia, welcomed pilgrims, attended to the duties as head of the household, in the absence of Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi for 8 years, between 1892, the ascension of Baha'u'lláh and the beginning of the ministry of Abdu'l-Bahá, and 1932, during the ministry of Shoghi Effendi for the first 11 years until her passing. During the ministry of Shoghi Effendi between 1892 and 1921, the Greatest Holy Leaf was alone in Akka and Haifa for 4 years, 5 months, and 7 days. Abdu'l-Bahá was absent 12 times that we know of during this period. As you see on this table here on the slide, the dates range from 1892 in the summer following the ascension of Baha'u'lláh to the 3rd of March to the 30th of April 1921, when Abdu'l-Bahá was in Tiberias, and the places where Abdu'l-Bahá went were Mount Carmel several times, Tiberias several times, the Cave of Elijah, of course, the 9 countries he visited during his journeys to the west. He went to Nazareth, and he went to Adassieh, where he had a farm. And during the ministry of Shoghi Effendi, during the first 11 years, this really should read 1921, but because he was absent in 1922, I've started the absences then. Shoghi Effendi was absent 9 times. And the Greatest Holy Leaf was alone in Haifa for 3 years, 7 months, and 10 days. And the absences of Shoghi Effendi were entirely to Switzerland. He also traveled to Germany once, and one memorable time in 1929, he traveled to England, and then he traveled overland from South Africa through Cape Town, Johannesburg, and then through Zambia, Zimbabwe, and East Africa to Sudan and Egypt, and returned to Haifa. And now, Bahíyyih Khánum's roles and responsibilities in Shoghi Effendi's absence. We are starting now with Bahíyyih Khánum alone in Haifa, and Shoghi Effendi first going to Germany to be diagnosed by doctors who say that he has no nervous reflexes left. And then he goes to Switzerland for several months, 7 months, 8 months. Starting on the 5th of April, 1922, for a full 8 months until the 15th of December 1922, the Greatest Holy Leaf was in charge of administering the domestic and international affairs of the faith. Friends, it was absolutely unheard of in 1922 for a woman to be put in charge of the affairs of a worldwide religious community, especially in the Middle East. I would venture to say I don't think that this has happened in any religious dispensation in the past, where the head of the faith has given the entire management of the affairs of the religion into the hands of a woman. If there is such a case, I would love to hear about it. I spent quite a bit of time trying to search for an example that was similar in any way to the headship of the faith of the Greatest Holy Leaf. I did not find one. Look at the responsibilities of the Greatest Holy Leaf. First of all, she's the only point of contact between all of the faithful Baha'is of the world and the legitimate center of the faith. She also managed the crisis of the keys to the shrine of Baha'u'lláh, which had been seized by the covenant breakers. She protected the faith against these same covenant breakers. She defended the Baha'is who were being persecuted in Persia. And she deepened the worldwide Baha'i community on the station of the guardian and the guardianship. She managed the affairs of the Baha'is in Haifa, including staff members, pilgrims, and resident Baha'is. She guided and encouraged the Baha'i communities worldwide. She also comforted the Baha'is all over the world, from Persia to America, that were reeling with grief after losing Abdu'l-Bahá. She encouraged Baha'i education initiatives. She kindled Abdu'l-Bahā's Western friendships. She followed through on initiatives that were started by both Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi. She encouraged the Baha'is in their teaching initiatives. She deepened the Baha'is in the provisions of the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá. She educated the Baha'is and the institutions on the administrative order of the faith. And this is what we are going to develop in detail over the course of the rest of this presentation. Part 3, protection of the faith. First of all, the keys to the shrine of Baha'u'lláh. In May 1922, Bahíyyih Khánum wrote a letter to the Baha'is of the world, so 1 month after Shoghi Effendi's departure, informing them of the severity of the crisis and of the unrelenting attacks of the covenant breakers against the faith over the past 30 years since the ascension of Baha'u'lláh, and the intensification of their attacks since the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. She also informed the Baha'is about the forcible seizure of the keys of the shrine of Baha'u'lláh from its custodian and the action taken to retrieve them. She organized a worldwide systematic campaign on the part of Baha'is and Baha'i assemblies. And this is the type of object of their petitions. This is the French embassy in Washington, D.C. in the 20s. So people contacted their embassies, and in the text of the petition that they were to send, in the words of Bahíyyih Khánum, should include these words: that the Baha'i community, in conformity with the explicit writings and the will and testament of His Eminence Abdu'l-Bahá, Sir Abbas Effendi, texts well known and available in his own hand, recognize His Eminence Shoghi Effendi as one to whom all Baha'is must turn and as the guardian of the cause. and that they have no connection whatsoever, either material or spiritual, with Mirza Muhammad Ali, whom they consider to be excommunicated from the Baha'i faith, according to the explicit writings of Abdu'l-Bahá. It should be the request, therefore, of Baha'is of all countries, both men and women in every important center, wherever they may reside throughout the world, that the officials of His Britannic Majesty's government in Palestine, its headquarters being Jerusalem, issue a categorical order that the key of the Holy Tomb, which is the point of adoration and the sanctuary of all Baha'is in the world, be restored to His Eminence Shoghi Effendi, the chosen branch. I mean, this is absolutely eloquent and authoritative. And this is coming from Bahíyyih Khánum, and she's asking Baha'is to write this to the representatives of their governments. And these letters and cables that they sent helped to convey the Baha'i community's unified stance on the legitimacy of Shoghi Effendi's station as world head of the Baha'i faith. Now, one of the most critical aspects of the work of Bahíyyih Khánum was defending the faith against covenant breakers. After the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá, the vast majority of Baha'is worldwide, of course, remained absolutely faithful to the covenant and were positively delighted to hear of Shoghi Effendi's appointment as guardian of the cause. But there was, however, a small minority of Baha'is, ambitious, ego-driven, jealous, and lacking in steadfastness, for whom Shoghi Effendi's appointment by Abdu'l-Bahá as world leader of the Baha'i community proved to be a severe test of their ego. They opposed Shoghi Effendi. They rejected his station as guardian of the faith. They broke the covenant of Baha'u'lláh, and they tried to instill doubt in the hearts of Baha'is who were not firm in their faith, Baha'is who were inconstant, maybe Baha'is who were half-hearted. During this time, something happened with the covenant breakers. The old guard of covenant breakers joined with the new guard of covenant breakers. So the aging old guard of covenant breakers were covenant breakers from the time of the ascension of Baha'u'lláh. They were aging, they were old. And the new guard, they were of the age of Mirza Muhammad Ali and his brother and younger. And so they increased and strengthened each other in their malevolent activities. They began widespread campaigns of defamation, malicious rumors against Shoghi Effendi, and at the headship of the faith, the greatest holy leaf's most urgent task was stopping that and protecting the faith against covenant breakers, most of whom were operating in Persia, and some of them were operating in the Holy Land, in Haifa. So during the 8-month absence of the greatest holy leaf, she was at the headship of the faith, a term used by Shoghi Effendi in his letter. And she herself had written this letter. And like she had written this letter, the way that she kept in touch with the Baha'is throughout the world who were confused by the actions of the covenant breakers was through continuous correspondence, through letters and cables. Through the communications of the greatest holy leaf, the Baha'is of the world receive a very, very important education on covenant breaking. The Bahíyyih Khánum was following the example of Abdu'l-Bahá, and she warned the Baha'is against the lethal spiritual danger of covenant breakers and covenant breaking. She informed them about their intrigues, their motivations, and she often issued specific instructions to individuals and assemblies. She wrote a letter in May 1922. Now you're going to just keep track of everything she did in the months she did this. She did this at the same time as she launched that campaign for the keys of the Shrine of the Bab. This is just 1 month after Shoghi Effendi is gone. She's doing a lot of things. Just try in your mind to keep track of everything because it's a lot and it's very impressive. So this is the letter that she wrote to the Baha'is, and it's fascinating. A great obligation of every Baha'i is vigilance to protect and shield the stronghold of the faith from the onslaught of the enemies. In these days, their activity has waxed strong. They are constantly on the alert and exert the utmost endeavor to cause such harm as would impede the onward march of the cause. Association with such people will cause discord and unrest among the friends and will be detrimental to the progress of the cause. Therefore, it is urgent that the friends exercise great wisdom and vigilance, lest through the evil schemes of the enemies, a breach may be made in the faith. The few people whom Abdu'l-Bahá pronounced as injurious to the cause must be shunned by all the friends, as Shoghi Effendi himself tells us to do in his second letter to the American believers. See the exactitude of the greatest holy leaf. She quotes Shoghi Effendi, but she specifically quotes his second letter. Another urgent duty of Bahíyyih Khánum was the protection of the faith in Persia. In the summer of 1922, Bahíyyih Khánum was called to protect the Persian Baha'is from fanatical elements within the Shia population. The oppressed and persecuted Baha'i community of Persia had never in its history had any sort of real freedom because of the constant opposition of this Shia clergy. But the enemies of the Baha'i faith had been bolstered by three recent things. The first event was the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá. That had given them impetus for their evil activities. The second one was the relentless attack of the covenant breakers on the Baha'is. And the third event was the political instability within Persia at the time. So these three elements conflated to give the enemies of the Baha'i faith hope that they could stir up trouble and benefit from the ensuing chaos and disorder. The Shia enemies of the faith found the timing perfect for them to launch a campaign of incitement against Baha'is in several towns and cities. The photograph you see on this slide is a 29 May 1922 letter from the Spiritual Assembly of Shiraz to the Secretary of the Interior of Persia about the persecution of the Baha'is in Shiraz during this exact time. When reports of renewed persecutions against the Baha'is of Persia reached Bahíyyih Khánum, she immediately wrote a letter to the Baha'is in America dated July 20th, 1922. Sad news has come to us out of Iran in recent days, and it has intensely grieved the entire Baha'i world. They have, in most parts of that land, set bonfires of envy and malevolence and hoisted the banner of aggression against this much wronged community. They have left no means untried, no plot or strategy neglected, and have arisen with extreme hostility and spite to pull out by their very roots the trees of this garden of God. They are taking the men and women believers captive and making orphans of the children. They are plundering the believers' property, sacking their hearths and homes. Bahíyyih Khánum mobilized the worldwide Baha'i community in defense of their brothers and sisters in Persia. These are all national conventions from a few years after, just to show you sort of the Baha'is that are acting on behalf of their brothers and sisters. Bahíyyih Khánum explained, first of all, the extreme gravity of the situation and how defenseless the Baha'is were in Persia. She requested that these assemblies act urgently by contacting the Persian embassy in their country and seeking justice on behalf of their persecuted Baha'i brothers and sisters in Persia. But the Greatest Holy Leaf devised a twofold strategy, very systematic. The first aspect of Bahíyyih Khánum's campaign involved Baha'is petitioning the Persian ambassadors in their respective countries to encourage the Persian government to take a stance on the persecution of the Baha'is in Tehran. This is Hossein Allah. He was the ambassador of Persia to the United States between 1921 and 1926. So the Baha'is of America would have contacted him to ask him to contact his government. Here is an excerpt of the Greatest Holy Leaf regarding the first part of her strategy. We therefore request the representative of Iran. This is the text that they're supposed to submit. We therefore request the representative of Iran to ask his government to safeguard our brothers in Iran from the aggressions of their enemies and to deliver that flock of God's lovers from the claws of the wolf and provide for their security and well-being. But the Greatest Holy Leaf did not stop there. This was the second part of her strategy, and this is Joseph Saul Kornfeld, the ambassador of the United States to Persia between 1921 and 1924. So he would have been the ambassador that the Americans wrote to in Tehran. Bahíyyih Khánum asked the Americans specifically to be bolder and more courageous in their defense of their Persian brethren. She asked them to contact Joseph Saul Kornfeld, the ambassador in Tehran, American ambassador in Tehran, and say, and further, if it be possible, you should make the same representation through your own ambassador in Tehran, so that he may direct the attention of the Iranian authorities to these persecutions and awaken that government to the possibility of divine retribution and to the shameful stigma occasioned by such actions directed against this innocent community by the heedless and ignorant among the mass of the people. Let him make them aware that there are thousands of adherents of this faith of the love of God around the world who are gazing in astonishment and disbelief at the savage acts now being perpetrated against their brothers, and are eagerly waiting to hear that the government has come to the rescue of this unique, this law-abiding people who are the well-wishers of mankind from the attacks of the ravening wolves. I mean, these letters showcase not only Bahíyyih Khánum's leadership skills, her organization, her talents as a diplomat and as a strategist, but also as a writer of the highest caliber. And she's going to wield her very eloquent pen in defense of the Guardian. And this is part 4, 26 months of letters. Starting with Shoghi Effendi's very first Rizvan as a guardian of the faith, the Greatest Holy Leaf began a 26-month campaign to Baha'is in all corners of the world, from Persia and Pakistan to America and Turkmenistan. And of course, the Greatest Holy Leaf wrote to assemblies, she wrote to individuals, and she wrote to people from the East and the West, rallying everyone under the protective shadow of the Guardian. In 1982, 50 years after Bahíyyih Khánum's passing, the research department of the Universal House of Justice published a compilation in the Baha'i world that contained 92 letters from the Greatest Holy Leaf. Of course, it contained all of the writings of Baha'u'lláh about the Greatest Holy Leaf, all of the writings of Abdu'l-Bahá about the Greatest Holy Leaf, all of the letters and cables of the Guardian about the Greatest Holy Leaf, and the writings of the Greatest Holy Leaf herself. Now, in that section, the writings of the Greatest Holy Leaf, there were 92 letters and cables from the Greatest Holy Leaf, 70 of which were written during this 2-year period in question, from 1922 to 1924. The remaining 24 letters were from the ministry of Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá, and some were after 1924. So 51 of these letters state a recipient. So I wasn't able to make any kind of statistics about the remaining 20 letters because they were undated and unaddressed. But 51 letters did state a recipient. And of these, 11 were addressed to the United States, 2 were addressed to Egypt, 1 was addressed to Germany, 1 to Pakistan, 1 to Turkmenistan, and 35 to Persia. You'll notice I call it Persia because it changed names to Iran officially in 1934. However, sometimes Abdu'l-Bahá, the Greatest Holy Leaf, and the Guardian call it Iran in their letters, but I call it Persia until 1934, and then I call it Iran, just because I'm pretty strict that way. So these letters to Iran were all over the place, but of course, the majority were to Tehran, which had 11 out of the 15 letters, but the rest were to places that were cities, towns, and villages, and some of them were Abadi, Ardekan, Hamadan, Esfahan, Khusif, Miyanaj, Ghazvin, Sangisar, Shiraz, Shishavan, Tabriz, Takur, and Yazd. And of course, like I said, 11 out of the 35 letters, it should read 35, were to Tehran. Now, I am going to spend a little bit of time on this because I believe there is a lot we can learn about these letters that the Greatest Holy Leaf wrote, because she wrote them in the first 2 years of Shoghi Effendi's guardianship. And I never ever like to mention his age, because his age was used by covenant breakers as ammunition, but the guardian was 24 years old. And that makes absolutely no difference in terms of his divinely ordained station as guardian of the cause of Baha'u'lláh. But because it was an ammunition the covenant breakers used to attack him, the daughter of Baha'u'lláh, who no one could attack, spent 26 months elevating his station and educating everyone in his station and rallying everyone under his protective shadow. I've chosen two excerpts from these letters to show two specific techniques used by, I have a background in literature. I studied literature, so I love analyzing the literature of the Greatest Holy Leaf. So there are two literary techniques that the Greatest Holy Leaf uses when writing about Shoghi Effendi. And the first one is an excerpt from a letter to Ghazvin that was in April-May of 1922. And I want you to listen to the momentous language that Bahíyyih Khánum uses very, very consciously. Baha'u'lláh used the words 25 times in his writings, preserved tablet. We've heard Bahíyyih Khánum use this already in Star of the West, preserved tablet, to use this. So this is the letter to Ghazvin. The will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá is his decisive decree. Now, before I continue, I want to say this letter, I want to show that it showcases how Bahíyyih Khánum speaks about the importance of the will and testament, the divine importance. And that's the point of this letter. And that's one of the literary techniques that she uses to bring home to the Baha'is how important the guardianship is and how the guardian is divinely ordained. The will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá is his decisive decree. It gathers the believers together, it preserves their unity, it ensures the protection of the faith of God, it designates a specific center, irrefutably and in writing establishing Shoghi Effendi as guardian of the faith and chosen branch, so that his name is recorded in the preserved tablet by the fingers of grace and bounty. Now, the preserved tablet is used 25 times by Baha'u'lláh, and the fingers of grace and bounty is a mystical term that Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá both use, and now Bahíyyih Khánum is using it. Now, this is going to blow your mind. This is a letter from to Shishavan, written on the 14th of September, 1922. Now, I'm going to read one paragraph from this long letter. This is the second technique that Bahíyyih Khánum uses a lot. She will refer to Shoghi Effendi several times by his name and his titles, his exalted titles. This particular letter, she uses 7 titles. And to make it very clear to you, I've put very large numbers. So the rest of the letter is on a black and white background, and the references to Shoghi Effendi are on a colorful background with a large number. Just listen to how many times she talks about Shoghi Effendi and refers to him in different ways. As expressed in the holy text, a specific center has been given us. With his own pen has Abdu'l-Bahá, the center of the covenant, selected and appointed Shoghi Effendi, the chosen branch, the guardian of the cause of God, the interpreter of the book of God, so that the highway of divine guidance has been clearly marked out and lighted up for all ages to come. This bounty is one of the distinguishing features of this mightiest of dispensations, a special grace allotted to this age. This is a short paragraph. and she refers to Shoghi Effendi by 5 of his titles. And the last 2 aren't specifically titles of Shoghi Effendi, but she is speaking about Shoghi Effendi. When she says this bounty, she's speaking about Shoghi Effendi. And when she says a special grace, she's also speaking about Shoghi Effendi. Now, this is my favorite part. This is Bahíyyih Khánum speaking about the Guardian with her eloquence. Now, oh my gosh, I counted 48 different ways that she refers to Shoghi Effendi. These are the most poetic terms. I didn't put all 48 because I figured you would all leave if I did all 48, but these are color-coded. Each color represents either when she's talking about a center, or when she's talking about the Guardian, or when she's talking about something other that's poetic. So they're thematic, but I'm just going to read them. So, the concealed mystery, the well-guarded secret, a most great favor. Listen to the love that she has look, oh, it's so beautiful. A wondrous gift, his eminence, an incomparable cure, the cure most exquisite, most glorious, most excellent, most powerful, most perfect, and most consummate. No dazzling gem could rival such a precious pearl. The highly potent remedy. Now, of course, the Bahíyyih Khánum also refers to Shoghi Effendi by his title of the Guardian, but she adds things. So, of course, the Guardian, but the guardian of his covenant, the guardian of the cause of God, the guardian of the faith. Once, Bahíyyih Khánum uses a fascinating and wonderful and powerful term, the leader, making reference to one of Shoghi Effendi's main functions as guardian, as outlined by Abdu'l-Bahá in his will and testament. Bahíyyih Khánum refers to Shoghi Effendi as the expounder of the holy writings, the interpreter of the book of God. Several times, Bahíyyih Khánum chooses to describe the guardian as the branch or the bough, really referring to the language used by Abdu'l-Bahá in his will and testament. The chosen branch, the explicitly chosen branch, the branch that has branched from the 2 hallowed and sacred lote trees, the blessed and sacred bough that has branched from out of the twin holy trees, the bough that has branched from the twin heavenly trees, the bough that has grown from the 2 offshoots of the celestial glory. Several of Bahíyyih Khánum's references to Shoghi Effendi talk about him as the center of the faith, the head of the faith, the center of the faith, a direct reference to terminology used by Abdu'l-Bahá in his will and testament, the authorized point to whom all must turn, the center and focus of all on earth, the center of his cause, the center of his faith, the center on which the concourse of the faithful must fix their gaze, the center toward whom all the people of Baha must turn, the appointed center, the designated center, the specific center, the specifically named center, the one appointed to guide the administration of the cause, the one to whom the people of Baha must turn, the one to whom all must turn, and the one to whom all the people of Baha must direct themselves. Part 5, the greatest holy leaf's responsibilities in the Holy Land. First, to the resident Baha'is, and all the pictures that follow show people who lived in Haifa. This one includes the greatest holy leaf and Lady Blumfield. In addition to her heavy responsibilities in defense of the faith, Bahíyyih Khánum also managed the affairs of the local Baha'i community in the Holy Land. The community of resident believers looked up to Bahíyyih Khánum for guidance. They shared their struggles and difficulties with her, and they asked for her advice in solving their personal problems. Many of these resident believers lived in Haifa or Akka, and they often worked as custodians to the holy places, gardeners, or even domestic help. Most of these families had children, and these children, of course, needed to go to school. and receive a Baha'i education. The teenagers among them needed guidance, and the parents needed means to fulfill their professional and family obligations. So all of these resident believers needed encouragement, they needed spiritual sustenance, and only Bahíyyih Khánum could provide those. So it was a huge part of her work. To the resident Baha'i community of Akka and Haifa, like Abdu'l-Bahá had been a loving father, Bahíyyih Khánum became a loving mother. And she had been, of course, for decades, but now she was alone. Abdu'l-Bahá was gone. The second aspect of Bahíyyih Khánum's responsibilities in the Holy Land is, of course, to the pilgrims. In the guardian's absence, it was Bahíyyih Khánum's responsibility to ensure that arriving pilgrims did not leave disappointed when they realized that they'd come on pilgrimage and Shoghi Effendi was not in the Holy Land and they were going to leave without meeting him. This is a picture that was taken, I believe. You know what? I'm not going to say anything because I'm not sure it was taken in 1922. I think it was taken after. But this is Curtis Kelsey, and we're going to talk about him next. The other aspect of Bahíyyih Khánum's role in managing the affairs of the faith in the Holy Land was the staff members. Even in 1922, the World Center had staff members who offered either to serve a temporary period of service and then return home, or they lived and served there. For example, this is a gardener you see working in the Shrine of the Bab in the early 1920s. This photograph was given courtesy of the United States National Baha'i Archives. I'm very, very grateful for this picture because it's very important because it really illustrates the kinds of people that depended on Bahíyyih Khánum. This is a photograph I found on another website, but this man here is a staff member who works the generator for the Shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel. And Bahíyyih Khánum welcomed the believers, and if they were arriving for their period of service, explained to them how to discharge their duties, answered the questions if they had any, and bid them farewell if they were leaving, as Bahíyyih Khánum did with Curtis Kelsey, which is the story I will tell you now. This story is really, really, really important because it shows the greatest holy leaf authoritative side and her leadership capabilities and firmness. We cannot have an image of her because she was humble and she had a very quiet nature. She was extremely strong-willed and she never often showed it. And this is why this story is very important, because in this story, she shows her strong will. And I love this story. This is also my favorite. Curtis Kelsey was an American Baha'i who arrived in Haifa in September 1921, 2 months before the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. And he was there to install 3 electrical generators on the Mount Carmel, which you see here during the day. So on the first day of Rizvan, the 21st of April, 1922, this is also a picture from the United States National Baha'i Archives of the Shrine of the Bab lit. You can see the lights here. Fantastic, lit with a generator. So the residents of Haifa were just filled with joy, and Akka too, because the generator was installed also at Bahíyyih. There were strings of lights that illuminated Mount Carmel. Everybody was very happy. Actually, I love this picture. This is also from the archives. I love this picture because the lights were so bright that there was a sea captain steering his ship and he got so confused by the lights. He didn't know where he was going. So the port authorities had to add the lights of the Shrine of the Bab on the official navigational charts of Haifa. And this is our friend Curtis Kelsey. So after the shrines were illuminated, Curtis Kelsey was going to go back home to New York. He was a very faithful person, and he wasn't worried about how he was going to get home, even though he only had enough money to get from Haifa to Istanbul. So this is when Curtis Kelsey is going to experience the full and commanding power of the greatest holy leaf. She was gentle, she was loving, she was generally quiet, but she was also very firm and extremely decisive. Now, those of you who know me know that I like to have donkey pictures once in a while. In my this is Curtis Kelsey on a white donkey in Haifa while he was installing the generators. He found time to climb a donkey, and he's having a good time because he's laughing. Curtis's plan was to travel from Haifa to Istanbul with the money that he have, and then he was going to get to Istanbul and work and earn money to get back to New York. So one day before he left, he was summoned to Bahíyyih Khánum's presence, and three of her nieces. Now, this is a great picture because this is Bahíyyih Khánum with three of her nieces, but we don't know which of the three nieces were there at the time of Kelsey, but this is a great picture. So one of the daughters of Abdu'l-Bahá, one of Bahíyyih Khánum's nieces, greets Curtis very warmly and praises him for his fantastic job, luminous work, literally. And Curtis is very humble and he accepts her expressions of gratitude. And so she insists that he take some money to return to the United States. And the very proud, very, very tall Curtis Kelsey, I mean, I think he was like over 6 feet tall, he refuses and he says, "No, thank you. My affairs are all in order." For Curtis Kelsey, there's no conceivable way he was going to take money from the family of Abdu'l-Bahá, maybe even from the women of the family of Abdu'l-Bahá. So he refuses again when the two daughters insist. In the end, the greatest holy leaf reached out. She took Curtis's hand. And this would not happen often. The daughter of Baha'u'lláh would not hold the hand of a Western man ever. So this is really special. So she reached out, took Curtis's hand, and said, "Kelsey, you need this money to pay for your return home." And she puts the money in Curtis's hand, and Curtis makes a very big mistake. He thinks he's going to negotiate with the daughter of Baha'u'lláh. So he says, "I will take it if you let me return it after getting home." Oh boy. So the greatest holy leaf says, "No." With that single word, spoken with so much authority, he just sensed that the greatest holy leaf had issued what felt to him like a divine command. And he had spent a lot of time with Abdu'l-Bahá and Fujita and their little brown cat. Like they had lunch every day together. He'd spent a lot of time with Abdu'l-Bahá. So it reminded him in a way of the way that Abdu'l-Bahá, who was usually so gentle and patient, could be adamantly firm when the situation called for it. And he was just shaken. So he just accepted the money and thanked the greatest holy leaf. And then he left. And then as he was leaving, he was like, but how did she know? He had not told a single soul about his financial difficulties. In her management of the staff members at the Baha'i World Center, Bahíyyih Khánum expressed gratitude for their service. Even though she had so much to do, she always thought of the kind thing and the generous thing to do. A few days before Curtis Kelsey arrived home, his mother, Valeria Kelsey, a very faithful Baha'i, received a letter from the greatest holy leaf thanking her for Curtis's priceless service. And this is a picture I love of Curtis Kelsey sitting on the steps of a building in Haifa with resident Baha'is. We thought that at this hour, when he is to leave us, we would write a few words and express our idea of the sincerity and absolute devotion with which your son accomplished his allotted task. And we would be in turn congratulating you for this achievement and assuring you that each and every time that we see those bright lights shining from those blessed tombs, we cannot but remember that sincere and diligent work which was put into it and the sacrifice of Mr. Wilhelm, who supplied the necessary material. How thoughtful, how kind. You know, today, still in 2025, the Universal House of Justice also expresses its gratitude when staff members leave the World Center after a period of service, if they're offered such service to the House. And in 1922, so did the greatest holy leaf. Part 6, the worldwide Baha'i community. Bahíyyih Khánum showed so much empathy to the Baha'is. The next two pictures are pictures of Abdu'l-Bahá from the back, leaving, away from us. After the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá, Bahíyyih Khánum gave love and comfort to the broken-hearted, grief-stricken Baha'is and comforted them with her loving kindness. In her letters, she acknowledged the intense grief of the Baha'is and empathized with them. These are excerpts from her letters. Men and women alike, young and old alike, share with these homeless ones the anguish of our bereavement and this direst of ordeals. We could hear with the ear of the spirit the wailing of these lovers of him who was the ravisher of hearts. Those like us, scorched by the fires of separation, from our own sad hearts, we would lift our cries of sorrows to the heaven, and weeping would send up our entreaties to the threshold of the luminous beauty of God. Another very, very, very touching thing that Bahíyyih Khánum did in the middle of all these such important responsibilities, she would remind people so lovingly about Abdu'l-Bahá's example. These are excerpts from her letters. His lot in all his life was to be wronged and be subjected to toil, to pain and grief. Under these conditions, the one and only solace of his sacred heart was to hear good news of the progress of the faith and the proclaiming of God's word and the spreading of the holy teachings and the unity and fervor of the friends and the staunchness of his loved ones. This news would bring smiles to his countenance. This was the joy of his precious heart. One of the virtues that Bahíyyih Khánum loved the most was steadfastness, but it's not an accident that she wrote so much about steadfastness, because this was a very dangerous time in the history of the faith where there were so many active covenant breakers trying to pry faithful believers away from the faith. And she calls steadfastness a treasure in this letter, this beautiful letter. All the virtues of humankind are summed up in one word, steadfastness. If we but act according to its laws. It draws to us as by a magnet the blessings and bestowals of heaven, if we but rise up according to the obligations it implies. God be praised, the house of the heart is lit by the light of unswerving constancy, and the soul's lodging is bedecked with the ornament of faithfulness. Steadfastness is a treasure that makes man so rich as to have no need of the world or any person or anything that is therein. Constancy is a special joy that leads us mortals to lofty heights, great progress, and the winning of the perfections of heaven. She's so eloquent. I mean, she's so talented. She calls steadfastness, but also constancy. She also calls it faithfulness. Yeah, faithfulness, constancy, and steadfastness. Just beautiful. Bahíyyih Khánum also found time to kindle the friendships, the Western friendships that Abdu'l-Bahá made during his 3-year journeys to the West. These very, very early, very, very faithful, very, very steadfast, constant, faithful Baha'is. These letters from Bahíyyih Khánum to them are filled with intimacy. They're filled with kindness and gentleness and love. And this is an undated letter to an American friend of Abdu'l-Bahá's. It is a very long time since we have had news from you, and we are quite longing to have one of your interesting and beautiful letters that brings us always comfort because of your sincerity, your love for the cause, and your constant energy in the work for the cause. You have ever been one of the Master's best friends. You are one of the oldest American believers, one of the firm and enthusiastic workers, and we are always happy to hear from you. The joy of our heart is to hear from the friends that are active and sincere in the spreading of the teachings. I think it's very clear in all these letters that the Greatest Holy Leaf is writing around this time and for the rest of her life that sincerity, faithfulness, constancy, these are things that she encourages, she mentions, because they are so important, because there are so many covenant breakers around. To the Baha'i community of the world, Bahíyyih Khánum was the continuity and guidance. You will notice in certain of her letters, her language uses terms used by Baha'u'lláh. Sometimes her letters sound like certain terms of phrases that Abdu'l-Bahá uses. And she also quotes Shoghi Effendi and uses some of Shoghi Effendi's terms in explaining the will and testament and the administrative order. But while the guardian was away, one of the most important things that Bahíyyih Khánum did was continuity in guidance. So she expounded on the subjects that Shoghi Effendi had begun expounding on in his first few letters to the West, such as the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá, the guardianship, the administrative order of the faith and the roles of the institutions, firmness in the covenant, of course, steadfastness, constancy, faithfulness, sincerity, the need for unity. And this is one that Abdu'l-Bahá touched on constantly in his lifetime. Unity. It was even a condition for him coming to America, was the unity of the faith. And of course, teaching the faith, which was and always will be the main concern of the center of the covenant, whether it's Baha'u'lláh or the Bab, whether it's Abdu'l-Bahá, Shoghi Effendi, and the House of Justice. And so when she was at the headship of the faith, this was also the Greatest Holy Leaf's main concern. And so now we're going to look at her guidance to the Baha'i community in all of these aspects. And this is the last few sections of the talk. This is the guidance, the continuity and guidance of the Greatest Holy Leaf through her letters. One of them touches on individual initiative, and the Greatest Holy Leaf continued the Guardian's cherished practice of encouraging Baha'is who were taking brilliant initiative. This is a photograph of Martha Root in China, but this is a letter that the Greatest Holy Leaf wrote to somebody who had taken an initiative with Chinese students. I was very glad to know of your meeting with the Chinese students, and I am sure your effect and influence shall be great upon them, because their fresh and receptive minds are ready to grasp the importance of this manifestation. And when you go to China, wink, wink, when you go to China, which you may if you think it is wise, your influence and success, I hope, will still be more. You see what she did there? Oh, it's wonderful that you met the Chinese students. And when you go to China, teaching efforts. This is a Baha'i unity meeting in Pretoria in South Africa in the 1920s. The Greatest Holy Leaf didn't just raise awareness in the Baha'i community about Abdu'l-Bahā's ministry, she encouraged teaching efforts. The good news that the word is being raised up and his cause glorified, and that his friends on fire with love for him are rising to spread his sweet savors abroad, are founding assemblies, conducting meetings, teaching most eloquently and with all their energies, presenting proofs, disseminating the doctrines of the divine bounty and the counsels of Abdu'l-Bahá. It is certain that ere long the light of these teachings will illumine the earth and gladden the hearts of the people of Baha. She also gave loving encouragement. This is a photograph from 1910. Showing Baha'is of Myanmar, but then it was Burma, in the city of Mandalay, with two visiting Baha'is from the West, Charles Mason Remy on the left in white, and Howard Struven on the right with a hat. Bahíyyih Khánum encouraged Baha'is and elevated their vision and helped them to see things with new eyes. You have written that your number is small. But it is decidedly true that it is not numbers that count. It is rather the sincerity and devotion of the friends. It is the heart that, subduing within itself all earthly cares, shines forth resplendent in the realm of love and selflessness, attracting to itself the souls of the weary and depressed, soothing their wounds with the balm of this message, attracting to itself the souls sorry, that's a repeat. Soothing their wounds with the balms of the message. So yes, your numbers are small, but it's the heart that matters. See, she helps to see things with completely new eyes. Now, the Tarbiyat School for Girls, this is really important, and this covers several aspects of her responsibility, because it's not only an educational project that she's encouraging, but it's also an initiative started by Abdu'l-Bahá that she is continuing. And so this is continuity in guidance and also encouragement to communities. This is a photograph of the Tarbiyat School in Tehran, I believe in the 1930s. The Tarbiyat School for Girls was one of the projects Abdu'l-Bahá held very dear to his heart. Abdu'l-Bahá had established the Tarbiyat school in 1909. Shortly before his ascension, Abdu'l-Bahá had requested that the American Baha'is find an American Baha'i teacher that could serve as the director of the school for Tarbiyat. Lillian Capps on this slide here is the one who answered that call, but she passed away in Tehran on December 1st, 1920, during her tenure as director of the Tarbiyat School for Girls. The woman who replaced her was Dr. Genevieve Coy, who spent a month in Haifa making a pilgrimage to the Holy Shrine of Baha'u'lláh and the Shrine of the Bab before going to Persia. The Greatest Holy Leaf, as Genevieve Coy was arriving, wrote a letter in July 1922. Like I said, so many things are happening at the same time. So she wrote a letter in July, 11th of July, 1922. And this is just absolutely wonderful. This is the Greatest Holy Leaf encouraging an initiative started by her own brother, Abdu'l-Bahá. His Holiness Abdu'l-Bahá, after the ascension of Miss Capps to the Abha Kingdom, gave instructions that one of the maidservants of God in America be selected and sent to Tehran to take her place. Therefore, they have selected and sent this radiant and attracted maidservant of God, Miss Coy. For nearly 1 month, she was in Haifa, associated with these longing and sorrowful maidservants of God, and she attained to visiting the holy tombs and thresholds. Now she is about to depart under the protection and care of God, and please God, she will reach Tehran safely. Now, in the conclusion of her letter, Bahíyyih Khánum expresses to the local spiritualist assembly of Tehran, that she hopes that they will lend assistance to Genevieve so that, as the Greatest Holy Leaf says, Genevieve may be engaged with a gladdened and joyous soul and spirit in the education and training of the girls in the Tarbiyat school. The Greatest Holy Leaf continued to offer her support and encouragement, lovingly received by the local spiritual assembly of Tehran. Now, we're going to continue in the same vein, but this is a thematic break, because up until now, I've been showing you the continuity and guidance that the Greatest Holy Leaf has been showing to individuals and assemblies in terms of encouragement, teaching efforts, initiatives by Abdu'l-Bahá, comforting people in their grief, reminding people of Abdu'l-Bahá's examples, and kindling Abdu'l-Bahá's Western friendships. This is really, this time, the last part of the presentation. This is the administrative order. This is the Greatest Holy Leaf educating Baha'is and Baha'i communities on the administrative orders. Everything is quoted from the Greatest Holy Leaf, and we start with one important section. It is the attitude of the Greatest Holy Leaf to change. This is one of her most remarkable characteristics, was her willingness to embrace change. The Greatest Holy Leaf was a decidedly modern, adaptable figure. She never, ever clung to the past. She was not passive. She was the definition of active. And she evolved on a dime as the Baha'i faith evolved. She served the faith exactly as it needed to be served in that moment, no matter what it is she was called upon to do. She did not serve it the way she served it in the past. She was a realist, a pragmatist. She had a great understanding of religious history, and she lived a life that showed that she knew new problems require new solutions. When she was a young girl, her life shifted overnight from the privileged child of Persian aristocracy to an exile, and she adjusted to her new reality seamlessly without lamenting the past. When covenant breaking became a constant in her life, she learned not only to defend the faith, but to heal the spiritual damage it was causing the community, as she did in Edirne in 1865 after her father Baha'u'lláh was poisoned, and during the Most Great Separation in 1867. When Baha'u'lláh passed away, she squarely stood by Abdu'l-Bahá's side. After the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá, she squarely stood by the guardian's side, rallying around the 24-year-old guardian and calling him His Holiness. She became his fiercest defender and his strongest supporter. And when the guardian began developing the Baha'i administrative order, instead of electing the Universal House of Justice, which is what some immature Baha'is wanted, she squarely stood by the Guardian and did everything in her power to educate Baha'is on the administrative order, such as establishing local spiritual assemblies. This is a Baha'i feast in Seoul, Korea in 1921. As the link, the living link between the heroic age and the formative age, and as the Guardian's main ally, Bahíyyih Khánum took responsibility to which Shoghi Effendi attached an extreme importance, fostering awareness of the Baha'i administrative order. In The Priceless Pearl, Rhea Khánum makes an extraordinary statement. On 8 April 1922, the greatest holy leaf wrote a general letter to the friends. She first acknowledges the letters of allegiance they have sent and says Shoghi Effendi is counting on their cooperation in spreading the message. And then she says the Baha'i world must from now on be linked through the spiritual assemblies, and local questions must be referred to them. This is 3 days after Shoghi Effendi left for Switzerland, and she's already explaining to Baha'is that things have changed. And now local matters don't get sent to her. Local matters don't get sent to the Guardian. Local matters get sent to the local assembly. Dr. Janet Khan makes an astounding statement in Prophet's Daughter. She describes the Greatest Holy Leaf's leadership style. Her approach, and these are the words of Dr. Janet Khan, author of Prophet's Daughter. Her approach to the administration of the faith was practical, systematic, goal-directed, and forward-looking. She did not hesitate to introduce change when circumstances required it, or the guidance of Shoghi Effendi mandated it. Her letters call attention to spiritual and administrative principles and provide necessary information. She wrote to individuals and their institutions. This is a gathering in you know what? I don't think this is India, actually. Kunjiangun, I think, is in Myanmar, Burma. I think I made a mistake in that caption. This is Kunjiangun, Myanmar, meeting American Baha'i visitors. Bahíyyih Khánum actively fostered understanding of the Baha'i administrative order and the importance of its institutions, as well as the activities of the Baha'is themselves and those of the elected institutions. She would stress that these institutions would have a transformational and refreshing impact on the outside world. It is clear and evident that the body of mankind in this day stands in dire need of such members and organs as are capable, useful, and active, so that their movements and activities, their bearing and behavior, their tender feelings, lofty sentiments, and noble intentions may at all times reflect heavenly virtues and perfections, and become the expressions of divine attributes and saintly characteristics, thus breathing a new life and spirit into all the dwellers of the world, and causing the inner ties and spiritual relationships to be fostered and fortified in all fields of human endeavor. Unbelievable grasp of just Baha'i administration, the spiritual implications of the Baha'i administrative order instituted by Baha'u'lláh, and the effect that Baha'is can have on society. Unbelievable. Bahíyyih Khánum wrote many letters to congratulate believers in forming their first local spiritual assemblies, but she also encouraged them to strengthen these nascent institutions. It is clear that the stronger grows the bond of yearning love among the believers, and the fiercer its fire, the more they will find themselves embraced by the bounties of the Ancient of Days and receiving the continuous confirmations of the greatest name. Then, thus will the assemblies of the friends become reflections of the gardens of the conquerors on high, mirroring forth the radiance of the Abha kingdom. Guidance to assemblies. This is a Baha'i children's class in the Caucasus in Russia in the 1920s. It's sort of, I mean, I didn't want to just put assemblies everywhere. I just wanted to show the people that assemblies taken care of. And this, of course, means that there is an assembly behind them. Bahíyyih Khánum encouraged local spiritual assemblies and gave them guidance regarding their responsibilities and how to face challenges in their respective communities. It is incumbent upon the members of the exalted spiritual assembly to exercise the utmost care with firm determination and not to allow the doors of complaint and grievance to be opened or permit any of the friends to indulge in censure and backbiting. You know, this could have been written by the Universal House of Justice. That is how modern the Greatest Holy Leaf is. But it also could have been written by Shoghi Effendi. I want to read it again. This is so important. It is incumbent upon the members of the exalted spiritual assembly to exercise the utmost care and with firm determination and not to allow the doors of complaint and grievance to be opened or permit any of the friends to indulge in censure and backbiting. Now, lastly, one of the responsibilities of Bahíyyih Khánum as headship of the faith was to receive and acknowledge financial contributions from Baha'is the world over. Now, as an example, I'm going to read a very spiritual letter from the Greatest Holy Leaf acknowledging a contribution, but I want to show you, because I couldn't find a contribution signed by the Greatest Holy Leaf, I wanted to show you this. This is a contribution, a receipt for a contribution signed by Shoghi Effendi in 1952 on June 3rd for a contribution of 200 pounds sterling from the British Baha'i community. This is tens of thousands of pounds today. It's a huge contribution. So what's funny is that this is for 200 pounds in 1952, and this acknowledgement of the contribution from the local spiritual assembly of Tehran in 1922 was also for 200 pounds. And in 1922, 200 pounds was 14,000 pounds. The check for the amount of 200 pounds that you sent as your contribution to the Temple Fund, a fund set up to provide for the construction of the Baha'i House of Worship near Chicago in Wilmette, Illinois, has been received and duly forwarded to Chicago. Behold, what a pervasive power this evidence of cooperation and support, this spirit of selfless consecration is found to release in the realms of the heart and spirit. I love it. The Guardian returns. Initially, when Shoghi Effendi left for Switzerland on the 5th of April, 1922, Bahíyyih Khánum, the Holy Family, and the resident Baha'is all hoped he would return soon. But everyone had very severely and extremely gravely underestimated the emotional toll, the emotional devastation that the sudden and unexpected passing of Abdu'l-Bahá had on Shoghi Effendi. The longer Shoghi Effendi was absent, day after day, week after week, month after month, the more Bahíyyih Khánum's anxiety and concern deepened and worsened. The guardian's absence went from days and weeks to 8 months. Munireh Khánum, whom you see here, the widow of Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi's grandmother, later wrote that Shoghi Effendi's absence had completely sapped Bahíyyih Khánum's strength. Finally, sometime in late 1922, when Shoghi Effendi still had not returned after months and months away, Bahíyyih Khánum dispatched Shoghi Effendi's mother, whom you see on this slide, Ziyayyih Khánum, the eldest daughter of Abdu'l-Bahá and Munireh Khánum, and some family members to Switzerland to plead with Shoghi Effendi to return to the Holy Land. One night, probably sometime in early to mid-December 1922, Shoghi Effendi was returning from one of his all-day hikes in the Bernese Alps, absolutely stunned to find his mother and a relative walking around the streets of a small mountain village looking for him. Bahíyyih Khánum tearfully told Shoghi Effendi about Bahíyyih Khánum's distress at his prolonged absence and convinced him to return to Haifa. It was time to go home. Finally, at long last, after an 8-month absence, Shoghi Effendi returned to Haifa on the 15th of December, 1922, refreshed, with renewed vigor and in excellent health, and ready to resume his duties as guardian of the faith. Next week, we are going to be looking at the first 10 years of the guardianship. Part 6, the guardianship and the greatest holy leaf. Thank you all for staying today. Sorry this was such a long episode, but it was amazing. The greatest holy leaf is amazing. Bye, everybody. See you next week.